Hi, good morning everyone. So my name is Adil Harris. I am a blockchain consultant and product lead at BTM. So Blockchain Technology Malaysia is a blockchain solutions provider. We are based in Cyberjaya in Malaysia. It's about 4 hours from here. What we do is we provide end-to-end development solutions for blockchain, right from consultancy to design, development, and we encompass additional areas of AI and IoT as well to our solutions. So kind of how we differ from most blockchain development companies is we've got about a team of 50 devs on board, and they specialize in quite a different number of technologies. So one way we remain different is we try to be as blockchain agnostic as possible. So we haven't really tied up to Ethereum or tied up to any specific blockchain platform in our development. We actually do our own analysis and review before we actually choose one for say, a project which our client has asked us to do. So this is one way we keep ourselves different and keep ourselves legit in this blockchain space. So without further ado, I'd actually start with my presentation for the topic, is blockchain the right solution for you? So for this particular discussion, I was actually looking for one particular image which we can use to portray the ecosystem which we are in today, meaning all the hype that is surrounding blockchain and what we often find in this ecosystem. So yesterday night I found this, which I thought which was it pretty much describes the situation right now quite well. So the need for decentralization that you see today, it's represented very well in the sense that it seems to me that we want to move everything to a decentralized model when there might be not really a need to do so. So if you analyze a bit more, and basically what we need to do is, before we get a blockchain business case to actually work, we need to do a bit of analysis. So what I'm going to present today, okay, before that, I'll run you through for all the clients that often come to us. We often find this sort of pattern emerge in the blockchain ecosystem. So in essence, there are usually different types of people that work here. So one which we definitely come across very often is a new entrant, meaning somebody who comes to our office generally who asks these usual questions about blockchain in order to learn a bit more. So what is blockchain? What is smart contracts? Are smart contracts legally bindable? Should I invest in Bitcoin? Is mining still profitable? So all these are very common questions which we still continue to get from a number of our clients, even after like 2 to 3 years of being in this space. And more often than not, these new entrants move to 1 in 3 categories in this space. So if you look at this chart, this sort of describes the 3 different types of people in this space right now. You have the x-axis, meaning the horizontal line below, describing the people who work in crypto more often than not. And then there's the one above, that is the blockchain, not Bitcoin group. So if you really look at it, on the left-hand side, you have the Bitcoin maximalists, people who describe as crypto solving most of the world's problems today, right from payments to everything you can imagine, Bitcoin, Ethereum, distributed applications, and who essentially favor that a lot. And then you have all these headlines that follow with it. Bitcoin going to the moon, and EOS is the future, and then all the talks about Lambos and discussions along those lines. Then you have the pole opposite of that discussion, and that group of people is essentially, we like to call them the bubble gang, who essentially don't believe in crypto or the space at all, who describe Bitcoin as a bubble, Bitcoin as a fraud, crypto as creating no value, and so on. So there's an entire line of discussion that goes into that space. Then I think we would, or at least most of the people in this audience would again fall into the third category, that is the blockchain, not crypto gang, which is probably all the banks and consortiums who are trying to build a solution together using, say, a permission ledger. So again, you have all the headlines that often go with that as well. So banks forming together, building a consortium, you have supply chain solutions being experimented. So all of this is a lot of experiment that is presently carried out in this space. So you often see most of the people that work in the blockchain space fall somewhere in this category. So for the agenda for my presentation today is, I'd like to give some perspective on probably where you should belong or where you should actually be analyzing when you start choosing blockchain for a solution. So let's start with a small evaluation. So what I like to run you through is a small step-by-step guide that you should probably go through when analyzing about the blockchain as a solution for your business. So by no means this is, say, a 100% perfect guide. In essence, when you choose a blockchain for a solution, the two major factors that should matter to you is, do you save cost and does your process become more efficient? But this can help you in streamlining your process much better. So in our evaluation, let's start with what we see today in this whole blockchain ecosystem. Yeah, we have number one, you have public or trustless blockchains. Basically, the kind of ecosystem or the kind of blockchain where anybody can come in and start a node, become a participant. Anybody. It's not permissioned. It's open. So if I say I want to be a part of the Bitcoin network, I can start a mining rig or something and actually connect to the Bitcoin network and become a participant. This is one type of blockchain. And obviously, you have the other type, which is consortium distributed ledgers, the permission type, where specific people are given access and you maintain a permission network between these entities. And then you have the third type, that is traditional centralized systems, which all of us mostly know and are already in place. So you have technologies which are very commonly known, such as Oracle and MySQL, which are currently being maintained. So if you look at this system right now, and you can see that as we go up, the level of decentralization increases. And more often than not, what we've seen in the past 2 to 3 years, you've seen that when traditional systems try to move to a more decentralized solution, you see a number of problems increasing as well, right from scalability, confidentiality, interoperability, all these problems that you would have never heard of 3 to 4 years back, they start coming in the more decentralized you try to push your solution towards. So in essence, let's start our step-by-step analysis with the first problem of okay. Before that, let's just review why you probably would want to decentralize your solution as well. Let's say you have a perfectly good solution in place for your financial system or for your payment gateway, whatever, but then let's just consider why people often talk about decentralization itself. So number one, unwanted behavior, censorship or banning of users in the system. Number two, charging high fees for use of the system. Say you are a central party and you are charging a high fee for user to use the system. Number three, changing the rules of the system. Say start charging a high fee. Number four, intentionally tampering with the data in a centralized system. And number five, human-made mistakes you often see in centralized systems, such as hacks or the business itself closing down. So you often see this. And if you really observe, or if you've ever read a white paper before in your life, you're pretty much guaranteed to see at least four out of these 5 points mentioned in some way or the other in most of these, say, blockchain ICOs or prototypes or experiments that are being currently carried out. So this is usually the problems that people try to solve with decentralization. So in our first 3 steps, we are going to analyze situations in which blockchain might not be the best solution for you at all. Number one question that you should probably ask is, are you trying to solve some degree of centralization in the blockchain system that you're trying to build? Is there a real need for decentralization? In essence, are you trying to remove a broker or an intermediary or someone who you see that is not needed in the system? So if your answer to this is no, then you are more inclined to move to your answer is blockchain might not be the solution for you. So a good example of this that you could think of is the banks in the R3 consortium who are currently working on their own remittance solution. In essence, they are able to do remittance in their network between one another without actually relying on a third-party intermediary. That is a good solution which fits this. So if the answer to this is yes, you should probably move to the next question. Is the object that you are trying to digitize, is it actually digitally native? Can it be represented in a digital form? So a good example, again, to take would be, you would have read about a lot of supply chain tracking solutions that you would have heard about in blockchain, especially the ones that use technologies, permission technologies such as IBM Hyperledger. So you would have heard about tracking of items like tuna, of many other specific food items itself. So if you So there's one key catch here. You have to really analyze whether these items are digitally native. If the item that is being tracked cannot be quantified or represented in a digital form, it doesn't really make sense. So for example, let's take the case of wheat. You want to track the movement of wheat from its movement from how it becomes from wheat to flour to bread. There's no way that throughout the entire supply chain you can actually track, because wheat is going to come from multiple sources. When it goes to the mill, it's going to all mix together. So it doesn't really make sense to actually have a digital form which can be represented throughout its life cycle. Same applies for something we've analyzed within our office, that is palm oil. From how palm oil moves from palm trees to actually become oil that is distributed across the stores. It becomes very analyzed to analyze in a supply chain solution. So if your answer to this is no, again, blockchain is now the solution for you. And number 3 in our analysis is, can a permanent authoritative record of this digital asset be created? So let's take the authoritative part of this. So you all know blockchains are a network of nodes connected together, right? So every participant in this network needs to agree on one source of truth, because blockchains, in the end of the day, are one source of truth. So if you have two parties which cannot agree on a specific value, say you have two parties which cannot agree on a specific value of a price of a security, it becomes really hard to store on a blockchain. That is point number 1. Now, can a permanent record be stored? So in more often than not, you have to analyze whether it's actually desirable to have a permanent record where the record cannot be deleted. So in essence, you have to ask yourself, it doesn't become a very good idea to store something like a grocery list on a blockchain, because this is the case. It becomes permanent, and essentially it would become useless to actually have a permanent record in this case. So if your answer to this question is again no, blockchain might not be the best solution for you. But if it's yes, we move to the next question. And this is the category where we analyze where the technology is still yet to evolve. We are still solving issues related to scalability. So first question is, for your particular business case that you've chosen, is high transaction throughput a requirement where you need transaction throughput of millions of transactions per second? If this is the case, the technologies, we've not yet reached there, both in the public space and even in the private and consortium space. We are still trying to reach that level of scalability. Number 2 is large amounts of non-transactional data storage a requirement? So in essence, blockchains are really good for storing transactional data, for storing value exchange, moving from one party to another. But when it comes to storing non-transactional data, especially private data, we reach all sorts of legal and regulatory concerns as well. So for example, something like GDPR, if you're storing private data and then this data gets replicated across multiple nodes who you don't even know, you really do end up in a lot of legal and regulations issues as well. So if your answer to this is yes, the technology is yet to evolve, because you have a lot of solutions which are currently in place which does solve the privacy issue in blockchain. So if you remember the gentleman from JP Morgan yesterday, they are working on a solution called zero knowledge proofs, where you mask the data in specific blocks. Such solutions do help you solve this problem. So, but at present, we don't have a good fixed solutions for it. So these 2 points, it's easy to categorize them as blockchains are still evolving to solve this problem. So let's go to point number 6. Oh, and before that, I think one thing that you should analyze is, for these 2 specific use cases, it becomes a very good idea to actually review whether your traditional database system actually solves your problem. There's 3 key points to note. Traditional databases have, regardless of how fast or how much blockchains evolve in the next 30 to 40 years, traditional databases will forever have better performance, and data confidentiality will forever be better in traditional database systems. And perhaps the most important point in all this is your database systems have been around for 30 to 40 years. They have 30 to 40 years of research has already gone in comparison to blockchain, which you can say is started about 5 to 6 years back. So anytime you actually analyze whether you want to move to this solution, this is one key area where every use case needs to be analyzed against. Will traditional systems already work? Will a simple distributed database solve your problem? So let's go to the next point. Say if this is not a requirement, we reach the category where we need to do much more further analysis and research to see if it actually fits. So point number 6, is there a need to really rely on a trusted third party when you talk about a blockchain business case? So more often than not, you would have often read blockchain business cases where people talk about the need for a regulator to be on the blockchain. some say auditors or any legal or compliance requirement. So there's one key point to note here. If a blockchain operation requires the need of a trusted legal or regulator to actually make sure this flow continues, then it sort of becomes a bottleneck. Then this whole problem of decentralization that we were originally trying to solve, it all of a sudden doesn't become solved again, because again we have that one-party bottleneck being formed. So there should be a more cleaner way or a more neater solution that needs to be designed to see how a blockchain network can work with the operation of a regulator without the regulator becoming a bottleneck in the network. So if your answer to this is presently yes, I think the onus comes on us to actually find a much more research and better solution in such a way that the regulator doesn't actually play such a key role in the ecosystem. But instead, the blockchain also can function with the regulator in place. Number 7 and 8, pretty similar in relation, is blockchains are really good for exchanging contractual value exchanges, meaning it's probably not the best solution out there if you say you want something like distributed decentralized storage, but it's excellent for doing value exchange, the kind of thing Bitcoin is presently doing, for securities exchange. For items like this, blockchain is proven to be best. For example, if you want to know the best solution that has been there for the past 10 years, tried and tested and survived pretty much all the hacks, I think Bitcoin would be the best example. For contractual or value exchanges, blockchains are the best solution. But if you look beyond that, if you're looking to implement some other aspect of decentralization, we haven't matured yet, or you can always consider alternative distributed technologies. Some of this which I'll be explaining after this section over here. So if your answer to this is no, you should be considering some other alternative distributed technologies that you can adopt. Number 8 is there a requirement for shared write access? Now, in your permission blockchain network, if you have just one writer and then the rest are all just listeners, it doesn't really make sense to use a blockchain or to even call it a blockchain solution. You have tons of already existing solutions you can easily use. You can pretty much use a central database service with an API. And if you want to go ahead and call that a blockchain, it's probably not really recommended, because that'll be like calling a horse carriage an automobile just because it sort of makes it move. So shared write access is a requirement would necessitate a blockchain solution. So in a sense, there are multiple alternative distributed technologies that you can use, starting right from email. Now, if your answer to this is yes, and every party in your network does require a write access, you can probably ask yourself the next question, and perhaps the most important is, in your permission network, are all the parties already trusted? Meaning, do you already trust everyone in the network? If this is the case, and the answer to this is again yes, you can pretty much be assured that you really, again, don't need a blockchain, because the trust issue is already solved. There is no lack of trust already in the network. You are pretty much guaranteed to solve the issue in some form, again, using a traditional system or some alternative distributed technology. But if there's a slight amount of mistrust between the parties, say a group of banks coming together and collaborating, then you do have a sort of legitimate solution for a blockchain business case. So now that you all know there are two types of business blockchains that I've described before. You have the public or the trustless one, or the private permission ledgers. So in your blockchain business case, and if you've reached thus far in your analysis, if you feel that there is a need to control functionality in your blockchain ecosystem, such as set particular parameters, give permissions for specific people to access, then you fall under the category of needing for a permission blockchain solution. If that's not the case, if you feel the transaction data should be public, you would more fit into the category of a public blockchain ledger. Now, if there is a need to control functionality, but you don't want the transactions to be public, you have a mode where, like one of the gentlemen explained yesterday, a sort of public-private blockchain bridge which can be used. And these are, again, a lot of solutions which are coming into this space as well. So this is probably a 11-step analysis. And like I said before, it's not perfect black or white. In the end of the day, the two major factors that you should consider is cost and efficiency. If this is solved, you're saving money out of it, then that's all that matters. But then this gives you good analysis as to how good your blockchain business case is, instead of throwing around as a buzzword that you more often than not see today. So now, for all the use cases that we have in mind, some of which might have fallen into the no category, and you might be thinking, you don't need a blockchain in this case. It's not that simple. Blockchains can be considered as the extent or the highest point of decentralization. There are various features of blockchains that you can actually borrow to not need the complete implementation. So to us, decentralization can be categorized into different levels. One is you can reduce your decentralization risk. The why we decentralize that I described about a couple of slides back, there are various methods that you can use to actually reduce your risk. So one such example is using digital signatures. For some of us who are aware of public key cryptography, you probably would know that this is a technology that has existed much, much before blockchains. So this is one tech that can actually be used to verify the identity of anyone who's signing a specific message. So to reduce your centralization risk and to guarantee that this is the person that is signed and this data is not tampered with, digital signatures are your best solution for reducing a specific centralization risk. There's another specific solution that you can adopt is using verifiable data structures. So blockchains has, if some of you would have heard, there's this concept called hashes and Merkle trees, which sort of give the integrity portion of the technology to you. But it's very easy to implement in traditional systems as well. So what these data structures actually do is give you an easy output as to whether to see if a particular data has ever been tampered with. And this does not require full-scale blockchain solutions to actually implement. Number 3 is simply adding more validators to your network, adding trusted validators to your network so that you can actually reduce the centralization risk or reduce any chance of tampering or hacking. Number 4 is open sourcing the code. Simple solutions such as the public can see what you're doing, and in case there is a hacker who's trying to misbehave in your system, his version will be easily pointed out to as an old one. Number 5 is enforcing penalties on people who are cheating in the system, and number 6 is adding a trusted third party who actually verifies and vets whether the integrity of the system is maintained. Another level of decentralization that you can adopt is partial decentralization, and that would involve adding redundancy of your data. And number 2 is expelling bad actors, basically punishing people who actually cheat in the ecosystem. And number 3 is a sort of completely decentralized solution that is adding unauthenticated participants. And that is exactly what you see in most of the cryptos and public blockchains, that you have untrusted parties coming and becoming verifiers and validators of the ecosystem. So that's what miners do in Bitcoin. And this is probably the highest limit of decentralization that you can achieve. But as you can see, there are various other features of blockchains that you can borrow and implement in a traditional centralized system, and you need not call it a blockchain anymore. So in conclusion, I hope my analysis sort of have given you some perspective as to where you should be in this space, whether you want to call your solution a blockchain, what alternatives you can also adopt for this ecosystem. So I would be open to questions, and if you have any queries regarding what we ran through, I can answer you now, or I'll be available for the rest of the day.
So for your first criteria in terms of intermediaries, so when we try to implement a number of use cases, sometimes we find that we do not really remove intermediaries. So what is your comment on that one?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question completely.
Okay, so for your first criteria here, you mentioned that whether that use case is suitable for blockchain or not will be like you need to remove intermediaries, right? But number of use cases that we have been exploring or implementing is not really remove intermediary. For example, like for the supply chain here, right? We do not really remove anyone, but it's just like to improve the speed of the traceability. So what is your comment on that one?
Again, so it really boils down to what your definition of blockchain is, because such a solution might really not require a blockchain trustless system as a solution. Like I said, there are various different levels you can implement decentralization, and blockchain is probably definitely not a requirement if it doesn't end up removing any intermediaries or party or some sort of centralization risk that you have. So, for example, using a simple distributed database or adding redundancy in your ecosystem probably solves your solution, but it wouldn't qualify as what you would call a blockchain solution to this.
With regards to the GDPR, you mentioned earlier that there's no fixed solution to make it compliant with GDPR. So do you mean, so that's one of the main reasons why there are no real-life use cases of blockchain? And if that's yes, then what about the blockchain use cases, for instance, the IBM with regards to the mangoes and the other one, are they compliant with GDPR?
Correct. So again, there are two different levels of blockchain, or two different types of blockchain. You have your permission ecosystems where you know your participants and the data doesn't really exist outside it. Then you have your purely public implementations that you see on Ethereum and other public chains. If you're talking about private data being stored on public chains, that does really lead to regulatory concerns, because it must be understood that in public chains, the same data resides everywhere, and private data being stored on public chains is probably not the best idea, and that will fall under GDPR regulations. But I'm not sure of the two solutions that were suggested yesterday, but since you said IBM Hyperledger, I'm assuming that it's on a permission chain, so the participants are known who share the data amongst themselves, so that would not probably qualify as a risk.
Hey Adil, so you mentioned that if there is a one writer and multiple listeners, that would not be called suitable example for a blockchain system, right? But even if many organizations have that situation, and suppose I plan to use this blockchain in that situation, is it going to help me to increase the efficiency and reduce the cost, irrespective it's not a blockchain solution?
It will not help you in any way to do so, because you have simple distributed technologies which achieve that in a much more simpler, scalable fashion. Right now, when you say one listener and one writer and multiple listeners, basically you have to wait for your data to sync across your entire participant network. Whereas for your use case, you really don't need that, because you can simply maintain a central data repository with an API. Make the central repository available for people to replicate, but then whatever data that your participants need to receive can be received through the API. You really don't need to implement a full-scale blockchain solution to actually solve that crisis you have over there.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.